Unfortunately, zeitgeist isn't something you can write. That's not a writable thing. The only writable things are intention and obstacle. But if you were to sit down and say, what I'm gonna write now, is a movie that really captures our time, good luck. The very first inkling was a 14-page book proposal that Ben Mesrick wrote for his publisher, Random House. Ben Mesrick is a novelist. He lives in Boston, and he wrote a book proposal about the founding of Facebook, sent it to his publisher. The publisher wanted to set up a simultaneous film deal, so the publisher sent it to Hollywood, and that's how the book proposal got in my hands. And on page 3 of this 14-page book proposal, I said, yes, I'm in. I expected that Sony was going to say, okay, wait a year until the book is done, and then you could start writing. But they didn't. They wanted me to get to work right away. So Ben Mesrick and I began working at roughly the same time along parallel tracks, and we met 2 or 3 times along the way to kind of compare notes.
They thought that I should direct the movie. Something I'd never done before. I'd never directed anything. And that scared the hell out of me. And we said, you know what, before we pull the trigger on this, let's just let David Fincher pass, okay? Let's send it to David, he'll pass, he passes on everything, and then I'll swallow hard and do this. So it was messengered over to David, and about 2.5 hours later, I got an email saying, Aaron, it's David Fincher, I'm gonna direct The Social Network, can I come over? And it was the beginning of one of the best creative relationships I've ever had.
I remember David telling me the first day we were working together about that last line in the scene, that he was reading the scene. The scene is 9 pages long, and he was on page 8. And he thought to himself, if this girl doesn't just punch him in the face in the next page, I'm going to stop reading. I'm not going to be interested. And sure enough, he got to that line, it'll be because you're an asshole. And he said, all right, I'm on board.
You really don't need a forensics team to get to the bottom of this. If you guys were the inventors of Facebook, you'd have invented Facebook.
There were 2 lawsuits brought against Facebook at roughly the same time. The defendant, the plaintiffs, and the witnesses, they all went into the deposition rooms, they all swore an oath, and they ended up telling 3 very different versions of the story. I didn't pick one and decide on my own that that's the truth. I didn't pick one and decide on my own, gee, that's the sexiest, that's the one that'll sort of make the best movie, and I'll write that. I liked that there were 3 different and oftentimes conflicting versions of the truth. I like courtroom dramas, and I like Rashomon, so I wanted to tell all 3 versions. I make it pretty clear to the audience that facts are in dispute, and that the movie continually reminds you that you are listening to a series of unreliable narrators.
I'm not embarrassed, you just made a lot of that up.
She was under oath.
Then I guess that would be the first time somebody's lied under oath.
There was a long research process on this movie that included available research, things like Mark's blog post from that night that you hear in voiceover at the beginning of the movie. And there were cartons and cartons of legal documents that I got walked through by 2 lawyers, one an intellectual property lawyer and the other a corporate lawyer. And finally, the first-person research, speaking to the people who were present when these events took place.
You better lawyer up, asshole, because I'm not coming back for 30%. I'm coming back for everything.
I think mostly about intention and obstacles. Somebody wants something standing in their way of getting it, okay? Doesn't matter what they want. They want the money, they want the girl, they want to get to Philadelphia, it doesn't matter, but they've got to want it bad. And if they can need it, that's even better. And whatever's standing in their way has got to be formidable. So I'm thinking about intention and obstacle. I try not to tell the audience who a character is. I try to show the audience what a character wants. To get one good idea, your mind has to flip through a Rolodex of 50,000 bad ideas. I do nothing but stream through bad dialogue, bad scenes, bad everything until just I accidentally fall on, wait a second. That's what it was I was looking for. For me, the difference between page 2 and page nothing is the difference between life and death. So I spent a lot of time pacing around, climbing the walls, trying to figure out how to start. And I went back to Mark's blog post that we hear in voiceover in the movie, and I decided I want to see the scene right before that happens. I want to see what made him so angry at this woman. I'll dramatize that. We will take it all the way through that night.
when he creates Face Mash and Face Mash goes viral and crashes the Harvard computer system, all the while cutting back and forth to the world's greatest party that he never gets invited to.
And once I knew I wanted to do that and I kind of had a beat on the scene, I then wrote it in roughly the amount of time it takes to type it. You know you don't know what you're doing if the lines are coming out like, you know, honey dripping from a jar. There's a line here and then you gotta wait a half an hour and the next line. Stop, put it down. You don't know what you're doing yet.
I've never outlined before. I use index cards. It just kind of organizes my mind. I don't think I've ever, at the point when I've started writing a screenplay, known everything that there is to know about the whole movie. It's kind of like walking in the dark with a flashlight. You can really only see as far ahead of you as the light goes.
Your best friend is suing you for $600 million.
I didn't know that. Tell me more.
The script is 162 pages, about 40 pages more than industry average. It's usually about 120 pages. That'll get you the average length feature film. But David told the studio that
this isn't as long as you think it is. It's going to be under 2 hours and I'm going to prove it to you. And we sat down with a stopwatch and he had me read the entire script out loud at the pace that I heard it in my head when I was writing it. So I did that scene by scene and he would time each scene. And if the opening scene was 5 minutes and 7 seconds, and it all timed out, by the way, to 1 hour and 59 minutes, and that is the running time of the movie. Nothing is on the cutting room floor and there was nothing that was shot that isn't in the movie.
There was going to be no improvisation on this. You can't do that with this kind of script. It's just a little too dense and language oriented. There's got to be a precision of language while casualizing the language.
And is it anybody or everybody? Is it the final club that's easiest to get into, the one where...
Anybody.
Anybody, yeah, I think you're saying everybody.
Okay.
this was 3 weeks of rehearsal where nobody was on their feet yet. This wasn't about staging. We were sitting around a conference room, going through the script page by page. People got to ask questions.
Yeah, I feel like I spoke maybe 3 times during the 3-week rehearsal period because the rehearsals were less about like rehearsing the scenes and or coming up with blocking or something like that. It was more about just like discussing the story as a whole, or, you know, I was interested to see how David was so focused on finding what was behind each word in the script and why it was there.
Aren't they supposed to be bonded in their outsiderness? And Eduardo did the worst thing he could possibly do, get into the Phoenix Club without Mark. He left Mark behind.
He allowed the actors to really own the language. You know, if you watch a really terrific musician, if you watch Yo-Yo Ma play the cello, you can see that it's been years and years since he's had to think about the notes, that he's just playing it from someplace else. And that's how it had to be with the actors and the words.
I was your only friend. Yet one friend.
You know, we're talking about a guy who has a lot of difficulty communicating. After all, he invented something that he needed. He needed a new way of socializing. And it's unusual for me. I tend to write characters who are hyper-communicative. My parents started taking me to see plays starting from when I was very little. And oftentimes they were plays that I was too young to understand, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf when I was 9 years old or something. So I didn't understand the story lots of times that was going on up there, but I loved the sound of dialogue. It sounded like music to me, and I wanted to be able to imitate that sound. So it's always been dialogue that I've loved, and never, you know, physical beauty, except when someone like Fincher comes in and is able to add that to what I've done. The first day of actual writing, it kind of suddenly occurred to me that I was writing for, these were the youngest characters that I'd ever written before. And I thought, I've got to, you know, how do 19-year-olds speak? I'm going to have to do that somehow.
More than that, I needed to, you know, it was taking place in the 21st century, so that I needed to skateboard it up or Mountain Dew it up or somehow. And I'm terrible when I'm trying to write like somebody else. So I tried about 1.5 pages of that, pulled my head off my torso, and put it back on, and just said, you can't write like anybody but yourself.
When there's emotional testimony, I assume 85% of it is exaggeration.
And the other 15?
Perjury. Creation myths need a devil.
That line, creation myths need a devil, actually came from Elliot Schrage, Facebook's communications director. Creation myths need a devil is something that Elliot Schrage had written in a memo to Scott and myself basically saying, you know, I wouldn't put too much stock in what these people who don't like Mark are saying. Creation myths need a devil. When you're writing an anti-hero, you can't judge that character. You have to have affection for the character. You have to have respect for the character. You have to be able to defend the character. So in order to do that, you find things about the character that are like yourself. As the writer, you have to be able to defend that character, and you have to write that character like they're making their case to God why they should be allowed into heaven.
You're not an asshole, Mark. You're just trying so hard to be.
One of the things I wanted to make sure I didn't do was tell the audience what they should think the movie was about. The movie doesn't take a position on who's right, who's wrong, who's good, who's bad, who's lying, who's telling the truth, and it doesn't take a position on what it is about.
For me, this was never about Facebook. I'm not somebody who's as interested in technology as maybe other people. I knew what Facebook was, of course, but wasn't on it and was never that interested in it. What I saw was, against a very modern backdrop, a story as old as storytelling itself, of friendship, loyalty, power, betrayal, class, jealousy, all these things that Aeschylus would have written about, Shakespeare would have written about, a few decades ago, Paddy Chayefsky would have written about. Again, I was just lucky. None of those guys were available, so I got to write about it.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. The Social Network is one of my favorite films of all time, and so I was really looking forward to doing this video. If you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know down below. I look forward to seeing you guys next week as we take another look behind the curtain.